I'm Mark Miller, and this is Katie Minnendorf. We're the team leaders of the Signature Group at Century 21 Carolyn Riley Realty, located in Fairlawn, Ohio. We know that real estate can get confusing fast, and if you're thinking about buying, selling, or investing in properties, there's a lot of information out there, but sometimes the answers aren't always clear. So we're here to let you in on some of the conversations that we have every day as realtors, so we can break things down, talk them through, to hopefully help you get the answers that you've been looking for. So let's get started. So, hi Katie, how are you doing today?
I'm swell, thank you.
Awesome. So I thought that this week maybe we would talk about something a little bit different and talk about real estate investing. One of the terms that I hear a lot and I think is a little bit confusing is the term fair market rent. So when people hear fair market rent, or sometimes it's called FMR, what does that actually mean?
Sure. So FMR is a term most often used when referring to single family or multifamily rental opportunities, investments on that side of things, and most often with affordable housing. Voucher holders are where we see FMR coming into play most frequently. So fair market rent, or FMR as it's known as an acronym, is the benchmark that HUD uses to identify what they believe fair market rent for an area to be.
Okay.
Now, it's not a promise of a rent amount to be paid, which I think it causes a lot of confusion, or a guarantee. It's just a benchmark.
Sure. So how does whatever city go about determining what fair market rent is for a property?
Now that is so good, and I wish and hope that if nobody takes anything else away from this video today, it is that if you're an investor who's out of our market, or looking to invest in a market that you don't reside in, that you do some homework with the local housing authority and or a local property manager before you start making assumptions based on HUD's FMR.
That's good advice.
Yeah, and here's why. So each housing authority, which operates the affordable housing program in a region. So for example, in Northeast Ohio, we have a housing authority for Summit County. It's by county: Medina, Summit, Cuyahoga, Stark, so forth. So AMHA is the housing authority that would operate HUD subsidies here in Summit County where we reside.
Mm-hmm.
So that housing authority sets annual payment standards. So you have fair market rent set by HUD.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have annual payment standards set by the local housing authority. And then layered onto that is rent reasonableness, which is what the market demands kind of by neighborhood, demographic, or zip code. So it goes 3 layers deep: fair market rent, housing standard, or the housing payment standard for the year, and that's set annually, usually in the last quarter of 25, for example, for 2026. And then in addition to that, they're going to break it down even more by neighborhood or zip code by looking at rent reasonableness within that specific community.
Okay, so I know that, you mentioned that we're talking about voucher holders mostly. So how does everybody kind of has different income, and I've kind of heard that income affects what someone is able to pay in rent. So how does that kind of factor in then?
Sure, that's a great question. And to me, another confusing little nuance that happens with affordable housing. So the value of a voucher is based on the size of the space or the unit and where it's at, right? Again, looking at those 3 layers. So that value of the voucher itself, would be the marriage of the property or the unit in question and the potential value of the voucher based on those 3 elements: FMR, the housing standard, and then the rent reasonableness for the community. However, HUD only permits voucher holders to pay up to a certain percentage of their income in rent contributing to that voucher. Typically, it's about 30%. What they're trying to do is they're trying to prevent voucher holders from being, house poor. you know, or rent stressed. I mean, call it what
Sure.
you want, right? So they take those numbers that are pre-established, those benchmark numbers, and the rent reasonableness for the area and the amenities that may include it in the building, and then they're going to layer in the tenant's income to see if the tenant can actually afford to live in that space. They may have a 3-bedroom voucher, but if they want to have a 3-bedroom space in a higher rent supported neighborhood, which makes the rent reasonableness recognize the rent is being authorized as higher, if they don't have the income to support the utilities and the other expenses that are attached with that property, then one of two things is going to happen. Either HUD or the local housing authority is going to say, you got two options. Number one, we can offer you a rent for this, but it's going to be less than the fair market rent or the amount of rent you're advertising. Or they're going to say, unfortunately, we can't approve that because the tenant, based on their reported income, cannot afford to live there.
Okay.
So one thing about FMR that a lot of people, especially those who are new coming into working with affordable housing, which I do want to stress is a wonderful place to work, both in support of community and doing good for people and its potential to offer great returns on investment, is that FMR or that payment standard includes the expense of all of the utilities that would be associated with living in that space.
Okay. I was wondering how utilities played into that.
Yeah. So if you work in easy numbers, the FMR is $1,200 for a 2-bedroom unit. So if the landlord is advertising $1,200 plus gas, electric, water, sewer, trash, that means the FMR is not $1,200 plus water, sewer, trash. That $1,200 includes the expense of water, sewer, trash.
Even if the occupant is paying those bills.
Yes. So what has to happen is the net rent to the landlord, you have to back those numbers out.
Gotcha.
So you are allowed to market it to open market tenants and even to voucher holders at $1,200 plus utilities, because that may be the going rate in the community. But if the housing authority says it's $1,200 and you're asking for those utilities to be paid, you actually have to reverse the calculation on that and back it out. Now, the gap between that net rent and the utility payment on a 2-bedroom unit is going to be much smaller. Maybe that's only a $200 reduction or $250 reduction, right? But when you get into the gap on a 4-bedroom unit, that is going to be much bigger, because to heat and to provide water for and electricity for a 4-bedroom house or unit is much greater than a 1 or 2-bedroom. So that's where you see a disparity that a lot of people don't take into consideration when they're working with the PM, they're advertising, or most importantly, before they actually make the purchase of that property, they're doing the math wrong.
Sure, yeah, and I know that's one of the things that I've always heard you say was that the bigger house has a bigger fair market rent on paper, but it doesn't always actually equal that. So I guess the bottom line is fair market rent isn't necessarily a guarantee.
Not at all. It's not a guarantee. It's not a promise. And it shouldn't be an expectation, because there's too many other factors. There's the local housing standards. There's the rent reasonableness in the specific community. And also there's the tenant income that dictates, that is that kind of final lever of how much can be offered specific to that tenant.
Sure.
Just because a tenant may have a qualifying voucher doesn't mean they can actually afford to live there. So you have all of those factors, and contrary to what so many people believe, there is no negotiation on rent offers with HUD. So I'm going to look right in the camera. There is no negotiation with HUD on housing payment standards or FMR or reasonableness. Now, there would be a variance in the offerings based on amenities or condition of the property. So for example, if there's air conditioning or a 2-car garage or some other amenities that might lift the value of that living space for a resident, or like an extra half bath, those things you could actually eke out a little bit more value in rent that may bump it up. But there's no negotiation. Their offer is their offer, and that's it. It's just a formula.
Gotcha. All right, so one of the things that investors don't always think about when they're purchasing a property is what their exit strategy is going to look like. Eventually they're going to want to sell.
Sure.
So what are some things that can make a rental property harder for someone to sell?
Okay, so the first thing that comes to my mind is if it's tenant occupied, just because I live in that world so much, right? So a tenant occupied property can be a pro or a con. And I think you need to start thinking about your exit strategy if you're handling a tenant occupied property with your property manager, or if you're an owner operator, you need to start looking at that at minimum of 6 months ahead of time. I would recommend a year. And because the operation of that lease, the strength of that lease, is going to matter, you know.
I would imagine the tenant matters.
The tenant's going to matter because do they pay rent on time? A savvy investor is going to ask to see that tenant ledger to see that there's no balance being carried and what their payment history is like. They're going to want to see the work orders that may be open or recently closed on the property. That should be disclosed anyway. And then how are the tenants taking care of that property? You know, having an idea if that tenant is hoarding, or is there a bunch of holes in the walls, or, you know, I've been, as much as we talk about problems, I've also been in so many houses where the tenants take immaculate care of the property and really take pride in their space. So that can be, again, a pro or a con. So it's both the resident and the power of the documents behind that resident, and then also the performance of the documents in that resident over time.
Sure. And there's a lot of nuances and a lot of like if-thens, because like you said, there's residents that have taken really good care of their property, but we've also seen residents that take really good care of the property but don't pay their rent.
100%. Yeah.
So you never know.
For sure. And it's interesting as a property manager as well as, you know, working on the sales team, when we look at a time, like for example, time to renew a residence lease, we don't just look at rent payment history or if they have a balance. We also look at how they're taking care of the property. You know, are they easy to communicate with? Are they communicative with us? Is everybody facilitating a positive relationship? You know, it's not based on money alone. It's, you know, we're all whole people, and so we always look at like the whole picture. And having that knowledge will make an exit strategy so much easier to map.
Sure. And you know, it's not something that we had talked about before, but I'm going to throw this in there. I think there is a fear factor for the tenants when you go to sell your property.
Oh, sure.
So, you know, I think that having that relationship either between you and the tenant, or the property manager and the tenant, that can walk them through that to know that it's not as scary as the thing, because I mean, it's going to be scary.
Yeah.
And that can, depending on the person, make the sales process a little bit harder too.
Absolutely. So having a positive relationship with the tenant, as long as it is allowed, you know, we always try to approach it from a constructive point of view, you know, letting them know this is what's going to happen. Listen, the lease instrument follows the sale. So both buyers and sellers should know that, and residents should know that. And, you know, how secure your residency is going to be based, again, on that lease document, which I mentioned just a couple minutes ago. And if it is a month-to-month lease, that often makes the property a little bit easier to sell because it lets the buyer have more flexibility. On the buying side of that, you know, you can make your entrance plan say, okay, I'm going to take 3 months or 6 months to stabilize this in this way or another. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely, those lease documents and the behavior of the tenants have a big effect on things. And we don't want to upheave people's lives just because we're selling an investment property. You know, the best path forward is always the path that helps everybody win.
Yeah.
I think something else that I can speak to is the fact that if you're holding rental properties or you're purchasing them, you need to really think about, like Mark, what you said about that exit strategy when you're making decisions about how you're financing, if that's something you're choosing to do. You know, if you need to ask yourself, where do I want to be in 5 years or 10 years with these properties? Because if you take advantage of a wonderful loan product that might offer a lot of restrictions, or a really high payoff penalty, that may not be a smart move for you. Or if you're trying to put them all into a blanket loan, you want to double check those loan terms. You want to be a savvy, consumer and check those loan terms to make sure that there are provisions in place where if you need to sell off one part of that portfolio in that loan, you can without, causing
Sure.
a detriment to the whole portfolio as a seller.
Yeah.
And as a buyer, you and your agent should be doing due diligence to make sure that those properties are actually saleable. Just because it's listed for sale does not mean that it can be bought based on the terms that you're hoping to bring to the table. So do a little bit of homework and have some conversation ahead of time.
Yeah, we've seen that a lot. I call it loan entanglement,
Yeah.
where you get into a product and then all of a sudden you can't sell the house because you owe too much for
Mhm.
what the value of the house
Sure.
actually is.
Yeah,
In
so
that
if you're
loan product.
leveraging it, keep that in mind too. Like, do you really want to leverage it? If so, for how long? And, nobody has a crystal ball. We can't know where the market's going, but recognize that might be a crutch later.
Mhm. Okay, so we talked about the exit strategy. Let's talk about entrance. So when someone is buying a rental, what do you think some of the things are that they should pay attention to that gets overlooked sometimes?
I'm going to say the thing, first of all, if you're buying a rental, you need to put your eyes on it in person, physically, or you need to have a representative if you're buying in an outside market. And it's not just a representative, it has to be a representative you trust or understands rentals.
Mhm.
So I love residential agents, don't get me wrong, but unless they have experience working in single or small multifamily rental purchases and beyond just the transactions, they may not always be the strongest choice in this situation. You just got to know what your end goal is and make sure you have somebody who's well versed in that type of investment. So that person or you should, again, boots on the ground. You need to look at more than just pictures and videos.
Mhm.
So we need to look at the actual structure in the basement for the foundation, because sometimes things may not be captured in photo or video. You need to look again at how the tenant, if it's tenant occupied, is taking care of the property. A big thing that I think gets missed, because some people are like, well, I'm not living there, it doesn't matter, is the functionality of the space.
Sure.
I mean, that is huge. I mean, how desirable is it as a place to live? I mean, we were just talking about that property that you walk upstairs and then there's a room with the door to another bedroom and a bathroom
Sure.
on the far side of that.
Yeah.
That is not a functional 2-bedroom space.
Yeah, and I think that one thing is looking at a property purely based on numbers can be a problem. Like, especially going back to fair market rent, you can look at a house and say, well, the fair market rent is $1,200, but will people actually pay
Right.
$1,200?
Sure.
Because it's not functional because there's a bathroom through a bedroom. It's those are things you have to really see.
Exactly.
In a listing photo, you're going to see a bedroom and a bathroom. You're not going to see how that gets into there.
Exactly. Now, I will say, on the other side of that place would be rentable. It just would be rentable at a lesser amount of money. So you would just have to keep that in mind. Like, so when you're buying the property, you need to account for the reduced rent. If it's a good space, somebody will rent it. And then you also need to account for, on your way in, what your way out's going to be, because you're only going to be able to sell it for less unless you find a sucker, which there is one born every day, but we certainly don't promote that behavior.
So we talked about kind of functionality in bathrooms. What are some other characteristics that can make a house more rentable? What do people like?
Yeah,
when
no,
they
that's
rent
great.
a property?
So I can really only speak to Northeast Ohio because that's where we're at. So they like aesthetics. I mean, it does not mean that it has to have quartz countertops and, beautiful stylish wallpaper, but it should be clean and nice and current, and fresh. Odors can be really offensive to people. Just like, think like a home buyer. Tenants shop with their eyes, they shop with their emotions, they have, they like a decent sized bedroom. Just because you're a tenant or a renter doesn't mean that you don't have those same, wants. So if there's air conditioning or a 2-car garage or a first floor bedroom, or a bath and a half instead of just a full bath. Those are definitely amenities that are going to rent your space faster, as well as you might get a little bit more rent for some of these.
Sure, I was
items.
wondering if people, like in the real estate sales side, people will pay more for amenities.
Yeah.
Is it the same
100%.
in rent?
Yep, absolutely. I will rent a house in a, actually pretty much in C-class neighborhood, B-class neighborhood, doesn't matter. If it has a functional 2-car garage or an air conditioner or a half bath, almost always it rents faster and at a higher rate.
That's interesting. So really, it sounds like the bottom line is we're thinking kind of like as we were buying the house, and that really simplicity and layout and functionality is really the key.
Absolutely. So layout, functionality, actual like a deeper dive into the condition, and making a plan. If there is deferred maintenance, just figuring out what your all-in number is going to be, and be conservative with your rent amounts. Just keep yourself in the black.
So when I'm talking to investors, I kind of feel like they fall into one of two camps. There's people that are looking to buy properties that they call turnkey, and then there's people that are looking to buy properties that they consider are value add.
Yes.
So I'm kind of curious how you would break down the difference between those two types of properties.
Okay. So just to help with the basic understanding, turnkey would mean it's 100% ready to go. You can buy it, don't really have to do too much. Potentially get a tenant in, or it already has.
Or it's already rented.
It's already rented. The tenant's great. The lease is good. You're just buying it and finding a place to park your money, right? And just see return. Value add is that it's not rented, or it needs some work before it can be rented, or it's completely destroyed. There's going to be some level of value add. Turnkey is pretty defined as turnkey. It's ready. Value add could be giant project to maybe $5,000 to just lease up, right? There's some work that needs to be done to get it operating. Okay. So for those two differences, I mean, yeah, I agree with you. People sit in two camps. They either want to push the easy button and identify that and just have it flowing, and that's great. The pros to that is you're literally pushing that easy button, but you are, the con to that is that you're probably paying a premium amount of money for that property because it's fully operational.
You're not going to see as much appreciation, maybe.
Exactly. But if you're looking at it for a long-term hold, if you want to hold it for 10, 15 years, that's okay, because you're doing less. There's practically zero capital outlay on top of securing the loan and maybe that down payment for a turnkey property. So you're finding a place to park those funds, let them give you a return, letting the property appreciate maybe over a longer period of time to see that, and you're still winning on turnkey. So the value add opportunities are people who may have a little bit more capital that's free that they can utilize to get the property ready. You're going to pay less money for that value add which hence the term value add. You have downtime because you're going to add the value yourself. There's going to be a little bit of elbow grease or a little bit of vendor coordination, some lease up time to get that going. But then once you do get it going, then it's going to give you that return.
Sure.
So it really depends on your financial situation and then your risk tolerance. I think at the end of it all, it's your all-in number that matters.
Sure. And I always feel like, and I'm going to throw this out off the top of my head, but there's kind of a third camp where looking at a tenant-occupied property, you can have a value add property that is immediately cash flowing.
Yes, that's a great point.
Because you can defer that maintenance if they're taking care of the property. If they're good tenants, they're going to take care of that property, and you can value add, maybe add something, an upgraded bathroom or an upgraded kitchen once they move out, and then you can still get that appreciation while you're collecting rent up front.
You absolutely can. And to even take that a step further, it could be a value add opportunity while tenant occupied, and you can add that value while keeping that resident. If you find value in that relationship with the resident, I'll use an example. We had one of our clients, the rent was extremely low. Like the rent should have been, working in easy numbers, $1,000. I'm not exaggerating. The rent was like $550 because she had been there for like 15 years. Nothing had been done to the property, and she was very happy with her low rent. She was willing to deal with that. as part of the purchase process, we actually spoke with the resident and said, hey, do you want to stay? Do you want to go? What do you want to do? Because that is an important part of that process to educate. That's part of due diligence, right?
Sure.
The tenant said, I would love to stay, but I haven't had carpet in 20 years and the bathroom fixtures are really outdated. And I would love it if this one pipe would not be leaking into the basement because I want to keep my stuff there.
Yeah.
So we said, okay, let's talk about what stepped rent increases are going to be to bring you to market, because market rent's way up here, and how we can improve your living space. If we do these things, do you want to stay? And she said, I absolutely do. So we came up with a roadmap that worked for the resident so she didn't have to move. She was very happy to pay the increased rent, and we could make some of these repairs to the property. And to me, that's the biggest win of all. Because you have no downtime, no loss of rent. You're making some of the repairs that you would make anyway, and you have a crazy, happy, loyal resident who's probably going to stay for another 10 years.
Yeah, and I think that's where that communication that we talked about earlier really comes into play. Is you can actually end up with a bigger win just by being nice to people.
Really.
And thinking about them.
I think one of the biggest misses that I see, especially for folks who come to us for property management services or with challenges with their rentals in general, is that they don't take the tenancy into consideration. The actual human that's on the other side of that lease, that's cash flowing, is a part of the successful execution of that lease. And if you just take the extra little bit of time to educate yourself on the vibe of the tenant, what's important to them, do they want to stay, do they want to leave, are they damaging the property, that is going to help you so much more accurately, if that isn't even a thing, so much more accurately, I don't know. But it will help you better make your plan, and it will help your plan stick to itself. Like you're not going to be acting reactively, you will be acting to your game plan instead.
So I'm going to throw you a little loop.
Okay.
You talk a lot about property management. I thought you were a realtor.
I am a realtor.
So why do you know so much about property management?
Okay.
I think we should address the elephant in the room.
Sure. No, that's fine. So I am a realtor. I'm a licensed real estate broker here in Northeast Ohio, and so many people think realtors just work in sales, or real estate is just buying and selling. Real estate is so much more than that. But one other area that we happen to work in is we have a separate, like a dedicated property management brokerage. That is Carolyn Riley Property Management, that we don't talk about a whole heck of a lot on this channel.
Sure.
But it is another part of what I do. So it makes our relationship as sales brokers and realtors, I think, so much deeper, because it doesn't start and stop with the transaction. It actually continues through to operation. We have the knowledge and the breadth to understand how it can operate afterwards.
Right. Awesome. So I just gave you a chance to kind of plug yourself as a property manager.
Thank you very much.
A little bit of time to plug ourselves as realtors.
Sure.
So why do you think that real estate agents like us actually matter to real estate investors? I talk to a lot of people that just call me on a listing, for example, and I kind of ask them, I'm like, so do you work with a realtor? And like, no, I just go on Crexy, or I go through Zillow and I find houses and I call the listing agent. How does having a realtor working for you, like the Signature Group, help?
I think that answer will vary based on the level of experience of the investor. So, for example, if you're brand new to the market and you've watched a few podcasts on Bigger Pockets or some of these other things, or listened to some stuff while you're driving, and you want to get into it, but you're not sure where to start, one of the best things that you can do is partner up with experienced investor realtors in the market or markets that you're looking at, or even just go networking and start finding some people who have more knowledge than you. It is very different than purchasing your own home. And success is found when you go deeper than just pulling down a free spreadsheet or listening to a couple of like big win examples that you hear on social media and going from there. So as realtors, you want to find somebody in the market who's going to represent your interest as a new, for a new investor. If you ask most realtors, can you help me find a rental property in Northeast Ohio?
Sure.
Almost everybody's going to say, sure, I can, because they're going to hop on the MLS. Exactly, it is. But we just, we've talked about in other parts of this, the nuances and the hidden expenses that can come up that can just, implode your plan. So, finding somebody who can help you identify those red flags as you move through your first, second, third, fourth transaction is going to really define either your success or your disdain for investing. And that's where we would come into play, because I will tell you, those list agents, they are not going to do you wrong in most cases, because that would be a violation of their licensure. However, they're also not going to help you identify those things or call out those red flags for you.
Well, and their fiduciary duties to the
Right.
seller,
Exactly.
not to you.
Right. 100%.
So I think I always feel like, just that team aspect. Like if I'm doing something, like I want to have a team behind me that understands what I'm looking for, that is pointing me in the right direction, where, we have people that are working for value add versus turnkey.
Sure.
I mean,
Understand. Yeah.
calling just the listing agent, either really based upon your own opinion, and especially if you're not in the area, like that's just a whole nother level of, if you can't walk the property yourself, you really need someone that you can trust to send you accurate information and give you an opinion that is not hindered by that seller's fiduciary duty
100%.
to the seller. So I think the next logical question then is, when people are out there looking for realtors, how do they know who is good at investment real estate versus who is good at residential real estate, or they're actually really good at both, which is also possible.
Absolutely, because we're good at both. I know.
Yeah.
So I would say you just have to ask questions and you have to talk to people, and I don't know that I want to say use your gut, which is not necessarily the best answer all the time, but if you ask the same 3 questions to 10 realtors about investment properties, like, have you helped people before? How many have you helped? How long have you been working in this? Give me your opinion on some of the best and worst scenarios, and the answers that you're going to get from 3, 5, 10 realtors that you speak to, I think will start to paint the picture for you, who you're most comfortable with, who seems to have the most knowledge, who wants to actually help you.
All right, so I think we're going to wrap it up. So, if you're thinking about buying a rental property or adding to your portfolio, or, just trying to understand how rent and returns really work, these details really do matter more than a lot of people realize sometimes.
Yes,
so if you want to talk through any of those situations, we're always here and happy to help you do that. So have a great week.
See y'all soon.